Hey everyone, we got the 1440 back in the shop. We're prepping for spring and taking care of the steering today, or the rest of the steering. So we already did the gearbox, and then we lubricated the CV joint right there going up into the shaft. So the steering gearbox is rebuilt. And we went through and put in new rod ends. These are half inch rod ends, so they're a little beefier than your typical little tractor rod ends. Pretty straightforward stuff there. Not really going to show much of that on video. We were just taking the old ones out, put the new ones back on, making sure they're back in the same place. The next thing to address is to make sure that we've got smooth operation in the spindle area here. And over on the bench, I've got the spindle from this side of the tractor. This is a fun one to get off. Some of them, don't laugh. It's a fun one to get off of the tractor. The reason that it's going to be fun is that these are 30-year-old splined joints, and it's Cub's best steering arm to spindle design by far, because it just doesn't, as long as it stays tight, it doesn't strip out, it doesn't wear, it doesn't do anything. But in any splined application, when it's exposed to the elements like it is here, you know, this guy is basically just sitting there like that with the spindle coming up through the axle, and it just sits there and it will just rust and rust and rust. So this one was actually pretty difficult. I've had some that weren't too bad. You know, you hit them with some penetrating oil and then tap on the side here. You know, you don't want to distort this surface or that surface. You know, just tap on the side and it'll pop out of there. You might have to get an air hammer. It's a heat and beat situation sometimes. Just be careful. Everything is mild steel, so everything's really soft. You know, I banged right here on this washer that they weld to the shaft there, and you can see I got distorted it, so I had to file it back smooth. But then I was looking at it. This is kind of funny. So you talk about quality control at MTD at the end of the Cub Cadet garden tractor line. Look at how cockeyed this washer is in comparison to the edge of the spindle there, or the end of the wheel bearing. So basically, when the wheel bearing sits on here, it kind of sits like that with a gap on one side, because they welded this washer on crooked. If you look at the other side, it's not like that. You can see this one, that one's pretty much perpendicular or parallel to the end. So anyway, I thought that was kind of funny. I was worried about the divot there, and it didn't even really matter because not even half of the bearing hits that. So what's the upgrade? The upgrade is something that you've probably seen and heard of. It's they call it steering spindle thrust washer upgrade. They call it a bunch of different things, but basically you've got just a plain washer, a plain machine washer that normally sits at the bottom here, and that's down on the bottom here as well. And so all the weight of the tractor kind of sits right here. Weight of the front of the tractor sits right here. So most of the wear is going to happen where the force is, which is down here. And if you look, see if I can do this with one hand. Ugh. I have to do one at a time. Well, that's fine. You'll be able to see what I've got. So we've got a thrust bearing and then two thrust bearing washers to help spread the load on the little needle bearings. So you're stacking like that. And you can see where all the wear was on this guy. Down there is even a tiny little bit of a groove, but I'm not going to really worry about it. So I've cleaned up the shaft here, just gotten any major rust or anything off of it, and I worked the steering arm up and down and up and down and up and down on these splines until they finally took the rust off of each other. And so they're pretty well cleaned up now. I can almost get them on just by hand. A couple taps of the hammer falls right on. So yeah, it's this is going to take place of a plain washer, so you've got, you know, something that spreads the load a little more evenly, or has less resistance. It's just a friction component, anti-friction component. The problem is that when you stack those like that, you've increased then the height of the washer that was on there. You've basically tripled it. So there is an accommodation you have to make, and I'm going to go through that right now. And you have to do it on both sides, and one side is a little different than the other. So, got a washer. It's not a standard size washer or anything, and this one's had the ID bored out with just a step bit. I don't have a lathe or a mill or anything, or even a drill press right now, so I just went through this by hand with a hand drill and opened up the ID. What you're looking for is a washer that fits, has the OD. The OD of the washer is the ID of the axle. And on this side, when we take it apart, you'll see that the ID of this one didn't even have to change, really. It's just the OD. Make sure it can slide down inside the axle there. So that side's already assembled. We'll look at that in a minute because it's less complicated. But this one requires some modification. Now, I didn't go over and deburr it or anything like that because it doesn't really matter. It's just kind of a spacer, and it doesn't even, the full contact width of that washer doesn't even, it doesn't even contact the full width of the washer once you install it. So I'll show you why we're going to install it. So let me get you set up over here. Okay, so let me move you back a little bit. And you've got our spindle, or our axle. And this is going to go in like this. And if you look closely, you'll see now that we have this space down here at the bottom where all the washers were, or where the single washer was, now where this this spindle shaft used to come up above this edge so that this arm could clamp down and not bind, now it's below that edge. So what we got to do is make a custom washer to go in there to take up a little bit of that gap. Now this one's a little bit too big, so there's a machined washer that would be perfect for this, I'm sure, if you had, you know, access to the lathe and you had something, you know, a little bit better. But the idea is, and I think the arm's going to go like this. There you go. So now you can tighten this down, and those two surfaces will not bind up against each other. So that's the reason we're doing that. When you go to connect this arm back to the tie rod, this piece is not keyed to this shaft. So what I usually do is, I think the easiest way to do it is before you take it apart, just run your steering wheel to full lock on the left, and that will position this arm where it wants to be. And then if it's full lock to the left, what you should see is that this bottoms out against the axle right there to limit the travel. So then what you have to do is just line up the arm and the steering arm, or the tie rod there, and you should be good to go. Let's take a look at the other side real quick, because I'll show you what the washer looks like before it gets messed with. And hopefully I can do this with one hand. I think that it's just going to drop out of the bottom, but that's okay. Bloink. Okay. So, if you look down in here, you'll see this washer is basically the exact same washer on the OD. It just doesn't have the ID moved out. And so that washer will just sit down inside the axle a little bit and provide just enough space so that this washer here doesn't bind up and will sit. That washer, when this is all installed, sorry, I'm trying to hold the camera and squat. When this is all installed, it'll be about like that. And then this just limits the down travel of the axle. So if it's a little sloppy, it doesn't really hurt anything because usually all the weight's pushing down anyway. So yeah, I wanted to show you that because it's a little outside of just textbook stuff. It's a little more involved. And so we're going to get this all put back together and shoot it some grease and see how it does. And we'll do a little follow-up after that, and I'll let you know. Now, I will say, this is not something that's going to make your tractor feel like it's got freaking power steering. It is absolutely not like that. You know, you might get a 5-10% reduction in the amount of force required at the steering wheel to turn the tires, but I think most in this system, really most of the restriction is in the tire assembly and the friction on the ground and all that other stuff. So, but you know, clean, lubricated joints from the front all the way to the back, totally important. And also make sure while you're down here to adjust those dudes so the axle doesn't flop back and forth, and that'll take care of a lot of the steering slop too. Anyway, that's where we're at, and yeah, thanks for watching, everyone.